So, morning as planned, we'll be having some meditation class on the topic of great compassion, and this is fitting into this broader topic of the Lamrim, or the stages of the path. And now we're on the third of these three, what's called the three scopes of the stages of the path, called the Great Scope. Um, just recapping, the idea of the stages of the path is a way of organizing all of the different kinds of meditations and practices we might need to transform our mind into a linear sequence, and specifically into three scopes based on the scope or the scale of our concern or our aspiration. The initial scope focuses just on changing our behavior so we can become a better person. The middle scope, the intermediate scope, focuses on more deeply changing our mind so that we can actually become completely free from fear, is the goal. And the great scope focuses on building our compassion, building our good heart, and then further developing our wisdom so that we can be of maximal benefit to others. I believe that we all would like to be of maximal benefit to others. And thinking of this means the influence that we have on others in our life. We want that to be maximally beneficial. And this means the people that we touch, that we've come in contact with, they leave uh, slightly happier, slightly wiser, slightly more peaceful, or at the very least, no worse for having met us. Um, and of course, there's two ways that we can have influence on others. There are more dramatic and direct ways, like, so for example, if you're a parent, tremendous, profound influence on your child. If you're married to somebody, for better or worse, you have a tremendous influence on your partner. And if you're in some position of influence, authority over other people, then you can have this direct influence uh, on the way they work or the way they live or whatever. But there's also these subtle ways that we have influence on others just through being in their social circle, and that's harder to notice and doesn't get as much airtime, so to speak. If you think about who's famous or who's influential or whatever, but the idea of Eileen earlier was mentioning her doctor, and of course doctors are in a position to have influence helping people, but the characteristic that stood out was not necessarily their medical skill, although I'm sure they were highly skilled. It was the compassionate attitude that they brought with them to their work. Now we kind of expect and hope doctors and medical professionals to have a compassionate attitude that they bring towards their work. May vary a bit, but what about a bureaucrat at the Department of Motor Vehicles? Like, you have to go get your driver's license renewed, and the person that you meet at the front desk, right? Grumpy, disengaged from their job, impatient with you, or patient, kind, compassionate, helping you move through, a bureaucratic process. You have to imagine that the people who are in bureaucratic jobs like that, you know, it's people are not necessarily enthusiastic to meet them. They're not necessarily, uh, you know, at often, as patient as they could be. But in their interactions, these people may have interactions with hundreds of people in a day, and just bringing a peaceful presence, a kind presence, some patience, some words of wisdom, they can have influence on thousands, tens of thousands of people, just a quiet, subtle influence. So the great scope is about increasing our ability to benefit others. Our ability to benefit others depends on three factors. A, do we want to benefit others? This is the most important factor. Critically important. If you want to be beneficial, if you want to to have a beneficial influence on others, you have to have a good motivation, a wish to be of benefit. Um, B, your wisdom. The of course, maybe you can be of physical benefit if you're in a job that helps others in some physical way, but there's a more subtle, more profound way of benefiting others through our wisdom. And the third is through our skill. And so you can have a great motivation, you can have profound wisdom, but skillfulness means um, really having that sensitivity to the specifics of every situation, and every situation is a little bit different. And so you can have, and this really is getting into um, the qualities or qualifications of a spiritual leader, spiritual guide, or someone who is really a good personal influence, a good life influence on the people around them. Um, their main qualities and characteristics are not necessarily that they are skilled in some physical craft. It's that they possess the demeanor, the personality that, and the approach and the insights that they can benefit people no matter what walk of life they're in. But again, they need good motivation. They need wisdom, understanding especially where our own and others' problems come from and how we can solve those problems. Fears, where fears come from, how we can become free from fears. And then a skillfulness, right? And that's why having someone from that's why there's a need for a diversity of teachers, a diversity of people with, wise influences to speak to a diversity of students, right? To speak to people with a diversity of backgrounds. Joanna talks about, counseling people who are in prison. She goes into prison and offers meditation and advice and so forth for those groups. Radically different culture from from teaching in a hospital, from teaching in a business setting, or from teaching children, right? Four radically different environments. You can be amazingly skillful with children, not great in a business environment. You can be skillful with prisoners, not great in a hospital environment. So that some aspects of our personality come out, our life experience, our concern for other people, learning their language, all of that's part of skill. How do we develop this skill? Principally by caring, principally by caring about those other people and caring and really wishing to be of benefit from them. So even the skillfulness comes back to this quality of compassion, and this quality of our motivation. So the meditations we've done so far in the Great Scope are all about systematically building our good heart. These 5 minds, we're now on number 4. These 3 kinds of love: affectionate love, cherishing love, wishing love. Now, great compassion, the 4th mind. 5th one next week, this mind called bodhicitta, which I'll need to explain more next week. But these 3 kinds of love: affectionate love, developing a warm heart and a feeling of closeness for others. It's based on the feelings we have for others, changing our feelings towards others, so that if we weren't feeling close and a warm heart towards them, we learn how, by contemplating, their good qualities, their kindness, to develop that warm heart and feeling of closeness. Cherishing love, this based on this believing them to be important, precious, their happiness to be important, precious. And based on cherishing love, these 2 minds arise: wishing love and great compassion. As you can tell, I'm repeating this sequence every week. Um, it's beneficial for your learning if I repeat. It's even more beneficial for your learning if you repeat. So your challenge, and I ask almost nothing of you. You come to these classes, you pay nothing. Your challenge is to try to learn, try to remember what are these 5 minds, so that later today you still remember what are those 5 kinds of good heart. Tomorrow you remember, next week you remember, next month you remember, next year you remember, right? I remember. I was taught this 20 some years ago. I remember. I put energy into remembering, right? So you need to remember 3 kinds of love. But the foundation of these cherishing love is really about care. It's about caring. It's about caring for others. Everyone cares. Let's say everybody has a level of caring that is 100. Your level of caring 100. But most of our care is soaked up in caring about ourselves. And so typically maybe 90% of our care, just let's say you had a care metric, 90% of your care is soaked up in caring about yourself, 10% caring about others. Maybe you're a person with a good heart, so 80% self-concern, 20% concern for others. Maybe you have a really good heart, 50% concern for others, 50% concern for self. Maybe you have a really, really good heart. Anyway, we're trying to build more and more of our care for others. You can care 100% for others. And in effect, you are giving your life to others, giving yourself completely. I only care about others. I would sacrifice myself completely for others. You can have that attitude, but still be wise in looking out for yourself. If you get sick, you get medicine. If you are in danger, you protect yourself. So all of this prelude I give because the foundation for great compassion comes back to this: just how much do we care about others? If we care about others and we know that they're suffering, we will feel great compassion. We will feel compassion. If you care about someone and you notice that they're suffering, you will feel great compassion. I keep making that mistake. That mistake that I make reminds me that I need to distinguish between compassion and great compassion. Everyone feels compassion. A dog feels compassion for her puppies. So her puppies are hungry. They nudge her. They want a little bit of food. She feeds them. That's her compassion. One of my dogs, if one of my dogs gets, I have two dogs, if one of them gets in trouble because of, and Ashley's like, no, stop. The other dog comes and looks with great concern, like, don't hurt, don't hurt Louis. Stella comes and says, don't hurt Louis. And she's very, very sensitive little dog. And her sensitivity feeds into some compassion for Louis or compassion for me. If my wife's giving me a hard time, sometimes the dog will come to my rescue. So dogs have compassion. Animals have compassion because we're social creatures. Well, at least all social animals have compassion. We have compassion, right? We have compassion for ourselves. If you're in pain, you shift around, you try to get out of pain. We have compassion for others. If somebody looks uncomfortable, hopefully we try to make them comfortable. Compassion is natural. And that compassion is sometimes described as our Buddha nature. What does that mean? It means that Buddha has this, we associate this strongly with Buddhism, of course, or some historic person. But religions tend to take on this characteristic of a social club and an exclusive social club. So are you in this social club or that social club? And typically we have the sense you can only be in one social club. And you're afraid to be shunned from that social club by having any affinity for any other social club. This is how we work. We're social creatures, right? And we have norms and standards and identity. But Buddha literally means awakened one. So our potential to awaken is rooted in our compassion. This potential to awaken is rooted in this deep wish. I don't want anyone to suffer. I don't want anyone to be controlled by fear, living a life controlled, driven by fear. And because to the degree that we do not want anyone to suffer, to the degree that we don't want anyone to be living in a life controlled by fear, we want to help in any way we can. And the more strongly you want to help protect others from suffering and fear, the more you will be willing to change yourself. Primarily, you will stop causing harm to others. You will stop causing fear to others. First thing we do. First, do no harm. Hippocratic oath. Also, This is like the most important Buddhist oath. Um, the main commitment in the Buddhist tradition is not to harm others. Number one, first, main commitment. Why? Because the whole path is about freeing ourselves and others from suffering and fear. First thing you do, stop causing suffering and fear. Makes sense, right? It all fits together. Um, then we move further and think, what can I do to help? What can I do to be a good influence? How can I be less afraid myself? How can I be less afflicted by mental suffering so I can be a good influence on others? How can I look for opportunities to protect others anywhere I do have power? Now, all of us, maybe, I don't know if this is true. Do you ever sometimes have this wish that you could just be the emperor of the world and just tell people like what to do, tell world leaders what to do, tell corporations what to do, tell, all people what to do? I certainly do. Just want to tell everybody like, stop it. That'd be my first primary instruction. Stop it, just screaming. Stop wars, stop killing, stop, exploitation, stop, you know, ex- exploiting natural resources, exploiting other people, and sort of stop acting in reckless ways. Stop it, right? We don't have that power. We probably shouldn't have that power. We don't have enough wisdom, probably, and care and skill to have that power. But there are places where we do have power. So, for example, if you have an insect in your house, you have the power to not kill that insect because insects are just like us. They have minds, they experience pain, they experience fear. If you have a spider in your house, ant, something like that, if you come close to it, like with your finger, it'll turn around and move fast in the other direction. You know that behavior, right? You know what that behavior means. You've known what that behavior meant since you were little. It means fear, right? That creature is afraid. It's trying to protect its life, right? So we can try to carefully rescue insects, right? We can try to stop causing any harm to animals, stopping things like fishing, hunting. Uh, we can reduce or eliminate, you know, eating meat or certain kinds of meat or whatever is your like eating stuff. First of all, stop eating human beings. Any cannibals out there? Stop it. Then stop eating endangered creatures, right? Anybody just have a taste for endangered creatures? And is there, anyway, this is a very personal decision because at this point everybody gets a little edgy because they're like, mm, they, because nobody likes, um, anyway, because we don't want to have to give up things that we like. Now, is eating meat the most harmful thing we do? Maybe not. Maybe there's other things that are more significant and would be more strong focus, right? Does it? Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. The point is, at some point, um, we will need to make sacrifices if we want to not cause harm. Um, Maybe it's traveling less. Maybe it's now we're starting to fly around. Maybe it's using less, less carbon by flying less, or doing carbon offsets or something. Anyway, you make the decisions. We have to look at our own life holistically and figure out what we can do to reduce suffering. Or maybe you need to travel a lot. Or maybe you need to hang out with people who are anyway. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on this verse. Well, what I'm saying there is look at the impact that we're having directly on others. And you all, I know you. You're good people, you're kind people, you're considerate people, you're thoughtful people. That's great. Then we look at the second degree influence on others. And then the third degree influence on others, the supply chains that we live as part of. Now, none of us, if you really reflect on this deeply, like I did when I was little, you just think, okay, how can I not cause any problems for anybody and now not have any environmental footprint and not, you know, and you realize the only way you could do that is to disappear. And you think, that's a bit, that's a bit extreme, right? Should I disappear? There's a lot of humans in the world, right? But we have an opportunity as human beings, especially as people who are interested. If you're listening to this now, it's because you've got a sensitive mind, you've got a concern for others, you've got a wish to become, wish to be more and more peaceful. We have an opportunity to have an influence in our society. And that's our opportunity to help society to find a stable state where we can cause less harm, right? Where humans can eventually find a steady state. We're way off in the extreme right now of causing massive suffering around the world to other humans, to the natural world, and so forth. We're way off as a species, off in the extreme. And there will be, various resets and sorry, various that dramatic sound reflects, the kind of drama and suffering that undoubtedly will arise in the decades and centuries to come. But we want to be steering society in the direction of peace, compassion, wisdom, harmony. And so this is our opportunity now to deepen our own peace and wisdom and compassion to help influence our society. So I got started on compassion, our Buddha nature, this nature for this potential for us to awaken, to change ourselves, to transform ourselves for the benefit of others. Compassion is the root of is the seed of great compassion. Great compassion means two things. Two things are distinct from just ordinary compassion. Great in scope, breadth, vastness, and great in depth. Great in scope means compassion for everyone without exception. Compassion for good people, compassion for bad people, compassion for rich people, compassion for poor people, compassion for people who look like us, compassion for people who don't look like us, compassion for humans, compassion for animals. If it's got a mind, we care about it. If it has a mind, we care about it. That's vast, broad compassion. What's deep compassion? Deep compassion is compassion for all of these subtle levels of suffering, not just, people who are in a bad state now, but for compassion for people who will be in a bad state later. And now that's a bit hard for us, right? Because we tend to get, it's a bit easier for us to have compassion for someone. We all have compassion for, cute suffering animals. You see on Facebook or some social media a picture of cute suffering animal. We have compassion for that animal. You watch a nature program, you have compassion for those animals. We may not have compassion for people who are not compassionate, right? We may not have compassion for people who are causing harm to others. We may not have compassion for people who we think are just so well off and unconsiderate. And so to help us to develop compassion for everyone on every level, we need to reflect that there's two kinds of suffering. There's traditionally there's three kinds of suffering, but I'll simplify and say there's manifest suffering where you're actually experiencing fear and suffering right now. Well, let me. I'm going to make a non-conventional distinction. I'll say three kinds. There's three kinds of suffering. One is manifest suffering where you're actually in pain right now. The second is fear. And we can think of fear as a kind of suffering in the sense that it is a recognition that we might experience suffering. That's what fear is. Fear is an awareness of the potential for suffering in our mind. And so if you have fear, so who has fear? Everyone has fear. If you have a mind, you have fear, basically. Everybody has fear. Why? Because we know, even if we're fine right now, there's a potential. And so fear is in that, it's in that spectrum of suffering. And you can be perfectly fine, wealthy and healthy and popular and so forth, and still have a lot of fears, tons of fears. Anxiety is prevalent, perhaps worse than in ages past. And the third kind of suffering is a suffering that is a worldview or a way of seeing ourselves and others that is a basis for the development of fear. And that is what's called pervasive suffering. It's the nature of our identity and how we understand ourselves. We understand ourselves as separate from the world, separate from everything else. We believe that we exist anyway. It's a little bit subtle, but the way we believe that we exist is rooted in a kind of ignorance that makes us feel separate from everything else, and thus feel susceptible to fear and thus susceptible to suffering. Again, if we reflect on these words of Thich Nhat Hanh when he was describing death, his own death or others' death, he said, "A cloud never dies. A cloud never dies." People are like, "Oh, are you worried? Are you worried about death?" He said, "A cloud never dies." What's that mean? It means he has profoundly re-understood who he was, what he was, how he was, what the world was, who people are, in such a way that not only did he not suffer due to the knowledge of impending death, he wasn't even afraid, right? Cloud never dies. So I've spoken extensively here, but I wanted to give this quote for reflection that I shared on Tuesday in the video, in the recorded video. And this comes from a Tibetan Buddhist text, a teacher named Geshe Langri Tangpa, and he lived in the 12th century in Tibet, about 1100 AD, or Common Era, as we say. Langri Tangpa lived in a place called Lang Tang in Tibet. So Langri Tangpa means the guy from Lang Tang. So this Lama or Geshe from Lang Tangpa, he wrote this short text, Training the Mind, 8 verses of Training the Mind, 8 4-line verses, and if I recall correctly, it's the 5th of these verses. It says, "Whenever I see unfortunate beings oppressed by evil and violent suffering, may I cherish them as if I had found a rare and precious treasure. Whenever I meet unfortunate beings oppressed by evil and violent suffering, may I cherish them as if I had found a rare and precious treasure." I'll repeat it a third time just so you get the feeling for it. Whenever I meet unfortunate beings oppressed by evil and violent suffering, may I cherish them as if I had found a rare and precious treasure. So reflecting on this verse, and there's a beautiful book, 8 Steps to Happiness, or the new 8 Steps to Happiness by my original teacher, Geshe Kelsang Gyatso, that it gives an extensive commentary, a whole chapter on this verse. Beautiful book. Whenever I meet unfortunate beings, so we're meeting people, and this is our feeling of life. We feel like we're moving around, we're meeting people, right? And what does this mean, meeting unfortunate beings versus meeting fortunate beings? Well, we'd all like to meet special people, fortunate people, people who are happy and healthy and helpful and wealthy and important in society and so forth. And there's a sense in which there's actually, it's interesting if you check, maybe you notice, maybe you can see a little bit of reluctance, fear of meeting unfortunate people. So imagine there was somebody who was super unlucky, and just being around that person. Like, you may be a bit afraid that their bad luck will wear off on you, right? And so whenever you meet unfortunate beings, I'm not so sure if I want to spend time with unfortunate beings, because they may be trying to borrow some of my good fortune, right? They may be looking for money or looking for something from me. Um, and so maybe we have some fear of others, fear of meeting unfortunate beings. And what does this mean? When he characterizes unfortunate being, what does this mean? So he used the expression, oppressed by evil and violent suffering. Now, it's interesting, oppressed by violent suffering. Maybe we see how that's somebody's got violently sick. That's a kind of violent suffering. And we can certainly appreciate how that person would be unfortunate. But he describes as unfortunate a person whose mind is oppressed by evil. Evil is a very strong word, right? Evil is evil is a very strong word. There's two categories of acting incorrectly. Acting incorrectly because you're just kind of clumsy and ignorant and don't really know any better and self-centered and so forth. And then acting incorrectly because you're evil, right? Because there's actually some malice in your mind. So this is at the referring to evil is talking about the far extreme of inappropriate actions where there's really some malice. But we understand this means the whole extreme of people who are acting in clumsy ways or ignorant ways or unskillful ways or self-centered ways, or even in this way where they're intentionally causing problems to others. All of those people he describes as unfortunate. If you look at the news media, when the news talks about evil people, right? There's these villains that come up in the news. Depending on what news you look at, they villainize different people, right? How often are villains described as unfortunate beings? Whenever I meet unfortunate beings oppressed by evil, we very strongly feel if somebody's evil, they're not unfortunate. That is their fault. And we have this judgmental view. And literally, we have a legal system, judges that determine, are you evil? You should pay for that. You should be punished. It's called retributive justice, as opposed to restorative justice. Justice that is for the purpose of retribution, retributive justice. If you listen, if you learn the story of an evil person, it is rooted in misfortune. And that misfortune can be deep. They were genetically born with some predisposition towards not caring about others, some like sociopath. Or early on in their life, before the age of 2 or 3, they had such trauma in their life that they were so profoundly messed up that they lost their sense of empathy for others. That's where evil comes from. Every being, so dogs, for example, which dogs are angry, violent? Which dogs are kind, sweet? Dogs that are angry and violent had violent upbringings generally. So thinking of evil as emerging from misfortune is very profound, and it really helps us to see that everyone is suffering, even people who are doing harm. So whenever I meet unfortunate beings oppressed by evil or violent suffering, may I cherish them. Remember cherishing love? May I cherish them. May I believe these people are important as if I had met a rare and precious treasure. And so he is speaking to this profound change of attitude. This is what's referred to as a reversal. Langri Tangpa was teaching part of this tradition of teaching called training the mind, in which one of the practices is developing a reversal of our ordinary attitudes of harm towards others or indifference towards the suffering that others are experiencing. The reversal of that attitude is great compassion. So may I cherish these people as if I'd met a rare and precious treasure. Why? Because these people are helping me to develop my compassion. The people are helping me to develop great compassion. These people are helping me to realize how deep suffering is, how deep misfortune is. If we're going to have an influence in society, we need to understand the systems that lead to harm and suffering and help to work to undo those systems. Okay, so I've spoken all the way to the very end. You may be surprised. Where's my meditation? Um, Anyway, as you're listening, if you're listening carefully, your listening is your meditation. If you reflect afterwards, then your reflection is your meditation. If you're practicing compassion in your daily life, thinking about how to protect others from harm and suffering, that is your meditation also. But we can take a minute or two just to reflect on this, this mind of compassion, just to close out the session. So we can reflect, closing our eyes if you like, we can reflect, just taking a deep breath in and out, resetting. Everyone experiences suffering, and everyone experiences fear. And that fear is rooted deeply in our way of understanding ourselves and others. Everyone has compassion, some compassion for some beings at some times. And that compassion is our Buddha nature, our pure nature, our potential to awaken. What will it take for us to awaken? We need to deepen our compassion, deepen our care, our cherishing of others, until it becomes stronger, 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 until we're willing to change ourselves. First, stopping doing harm to others, stopping causing suffering or fear to others, gradually helping others to become free from their suffering and fears, focusing on our sphere of influence, whether that's insects or animals or people around us. And gradually even changing the way we understand our world, developing the wisdom that sees our world in a profoundly different way. And we can reflect that just by coming here, listening, contemplating, our mind has changed. And we have, it's like walking down a mental, like a path, like walking down a path. We have traveled these mental pathways. The more we walk down a path, the deeper and broader it becomes. The more we use these mental pathways, the deeper and broader they become. The more they influence ourselves and others directly and indirectly. And we make a decision to carry this compassionate heart into our daily life, allowing it to gradually influence everything that we think, say, and do. And then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation.